Good evening, my name is Gemma and I am a musician and I've just completed a master's degree in molecular neuroscience. So interesting topics like music and the emotions from a physiological perspective and also a psychological perspective really interest me. So I've spent some time collating and compiling some data from particular papers because it fits in quite nicely with my business model as a musician and an artist and an agent. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into it. So music has long been recognised as a powerful emotional trigger capable of influencing our mood, cognitive processes in profound ways. Key points to keep in mind are music can evoke both positive and negative emotions depending on factors like genre, tempo and context in which it's experienced. So understanding the emotional power of music opens up opportunities for its application across various fields, from psychology and therapy to marketing and beyond. In the recent decades, academic interest in how music impacts our emotions has grown significantly, with research continuing to uncover insights into this connection. By the end of the session, we'll have a deeper understanding of how music shapes our emotional world and how we can harness this knowledge. So, two researchers or two doctors called Juslin and Sloboda in 2010 collated and put together a handbook of music and emotion theory, research and applications called Theories of Music and Emotion. And if you'd like a copy of this presentation, do let me know. I can send you the PDF and it'll have the reference slide at the end so that you can look up these and read them at your leisure. And I'm this outlining the presentation for today. So I'm going to cover off these key theories and present to you three separate papers that show these particular aspects of music and emotion. So to start off with, cognitive appraisal theory was proposed by Richard Lazarus in 1991, and this particular theory suggests that emotions arise from personal interpretation of events in relation to goals. So Juslin Sloboda in 2010 applied this to music, showing how personal experiences, expectations and cognitive evaluations shape emotional responses to music. Neurobiological approaches, which is another key theory, is covered by effective neuroscience research, which highlights how music-induced emotions are processed in the brain. So Stefan Kolch of 2014 identifies key regions involved in emotional responses to music, including the amygdala, prefrontal cortex, and dopaminergic system. And the particular paper that I'm going to cover off with you today is by Blood and Zatorre in 2001, and they found that pleasurable music activates reward-related brain areas such as the ventral striatum, linking music to brain's reward system. So Juslin and Sloboda in 2010 summarised these neurobiological insights, connecting them to broader research on music and emotions. Further key theories is a further key theory is evolutionary perspective on music and emotion. And this particular theory was influenced by Darwin in 1871 and Geoffrey Miller of 2000. And from this perspective, it suggests that music evolved as a tool for survival, social bonding and sexual selection. So Ian Cross of 2001 argues that music's role in communication and group cohesion made it an adaptive mechanism. Juslin and Sloboda of 2010 discuss how these evolutionary theories explain why music remains a powerful emotional and social tool, and this research collectively highlights how music engages cognitive, neurobiological and evolutionary mechanisms to shape emotional experiences. So I thought this slide would be interesting to look at the mapping of Richard Lazarus, and actually this is Susan Folkman. This isn't the other chap, Sloboda, that I was talking about. This is Susan Folkman and Richard Lazarus, and they talk about the cognitive appraisal theory in terms of stress. So if we look at the mapping of this, and you may need to pause the video and take a photo and expand it so you can see it. But if you look at the top, it talks about a provoking event. Okay, so something that happens. So for example, this morning I went to drive the dog for a walk and I found that my tyre was flat. So I had a flat left-hand tyre. So this is the primary appraisal part in terms of the event, and this can lead us into two mechanisms. So one being that we are positive about it and therefore we don't experience any stress, or this particular primary appraisal will lead to stress, which is then indicative of harm, loss, threat and challenge. And then it goes into secondary appraisal, which then flows into either two ways. One is coping resources, which are adequate. So I feel that I'm adequately resourced from an emotional point of view to deal with a flat tyre. So whilst annoying, I didn't stress too much about it. It was too early in the morning to do anything, just drove the car back, took the dog for a walk on the nearest beach, and then waited until I could phone the garage. Job's done. Or you don't have coping resources that are adequate, and this leads to stress and distress. And I think this probably depends on the magnitude of the event, obviously, and how you cope with that. But this is quite an interesting flow chart, which will lead nicely into some of the strategies that we can use in terms of music and how we can cope with these particular. So as we've already covered off in the brief introduction, the cognitive appraisal theory, theories of music and emotion regulation, conducted by Lazarus and Juslin and Sloboda. The key idea here, and just to reiterate, because I've already stated it once, but it's always helpful to repeat, emotions arise from how we interpret events in relation to personal goals. And in terms of application to music, music evokes emotions based on personal experiences, expectations and cognitive evaluation. So listeners can actually reframe their interpretation of music to influence their emotions, viewing sad songs as nostalgic rather than distressing. So I can give you an example of a person experiencing anxiety that may listen to music that's associated with past successes to regain confidence. But in the scenario that I can present to you, I played what would ordinarily be a beautiful wedding song at somebody's wedding, and the room was filled with tears. And I thought, oh, I hope that's tears of joy. And at the end of the wedding, I was notified that actually that song was played at a close family member's funeral, which is why it evoked emotion like that. But actually the feedback was that they wouldn't have wanted it not to have been played, because actually it was nice as a reminder at a celebratory event. But it did highlight that I need to ensure that on each booking that somebody notifies me if there's music they don't want played for that very reason. But if you think about it in terms of reframing, if it's a recent event, the likelihood is that somebody will be emotional in a sorrowful way, or more so like the event that I played at, it would be more nostalgic because the period of time had elapsed. So how people then reframe that memory and actually attach other emotions to the music after hearing it several times subsequent to that. So that's quite interesting. So in terms of the paper that I'm going to cover to look at the neurological and the physiological underpinnings of how music can elicit emotions, I'm going to cover off a paper by Blood et al. 2001. And they demonstrate in their PET study, PET scan, they found that intensely pleasurable emotional responses to music, such as chills, and that's not chills in the sense of the flu, that's chills in the sense of hairs standing on the back of your neck, or feelings of arousal or feelings of chills, because it's quite evocative music, were linked to increased cerebral blood flow in brain regions associated with reward and emotion regulation. So this includes areas like ventral striatum, the amygdala, the orbitofrontal cortex, and regions associated with euphoria inducing stimuli. So bringing this all together ahead of dipping into the research that I've conducted, cognitive appraisal theory suggests that our personal interpretation of music shapes our emotional experiences, and findings of Blood and Zatorre of 2001 show that these emotional experiences are not just physiological but also biologically grounded in the brain's reward systems. Thus, music does not only evoke emotions based on our interpretation, but can also activate and bring euphoric mirroring of other positive emotional experiences. So if we're aware of that, then we can activate that maybe quickly in certain scenarios. So in essence, the meaning we assign to music, whether viewed as nostalgic, distressing or uplifting, determines emotional experience that it evokes, both physiologically and also neurobiologically. So from the neuroimaging research that was conducted by Blood et al., a seminal study utilised positron emission tomography, which is effectively the full version of PET, to investigate the neural mechanisms underlying intensely pleasurable emotional responses to music. Over the past decade, the majority of imaging studies on emotion have focused on examining emotions with negative valence. Through this research, a neural circuit responsible for processing aversive stimuli has identified with the amygdala playing a crucial role. So studies demonstrated that activity changes in the amygdala occurred during detection, and this is cited by a number of researchers, Adolphs and Scott, pre-1998, and during the detection and generation, Lane, Taylor, Zold and Pardo, of fear-related emotions. So the amygdala has been found to process stimuli from multiple sensory modalities, as cited by Davis and Wallen, 2001, and Zold, 2003. And functional imaging studies have primarily investigated amygdala responses in the visual modality, often using images of fearful facial expressions, as reported by Bretta, Morris, Phillips, Wallen. In the auditory domain, the amygdala is involved in processing effective non-verbal vocal expressions as experienced by PET, Morris et al. 1991, and fMRI studies as cited or reported by Phillips et al. 1998, Sander and Scheich 2001, and moreover, case studies indicate that the amygdala damage in the amygdala impairs the recognition of auditory danger signals, as reported by Anderson and Phelps 1998, Scott et al. 1997. However, when it comes to music, lesion studies suggest impaired recognition of fear in patients with amygdala recessions, as cited by Juslin et al. 2005. Through functional imaging studies have yet to report direct amygdala activation in response to music stimuli. That said, the amygdala is also implicated in positive emotion processing, reported by Davis and Wallen, Hamnen, Libison, Zold, all pre-2003. And it involves a system incorporating additional cerebral structures, including the limbic, amygdala, hippocampus, and paralympic structures. So the insular, for example, the insular and orbital frontal cortex, which is reported by Mega et al. 1997. So these structures contribute to a progressing and wide range of emotions. Baxter and Chibber 1999, Calder et al. 2001, Dolan 2003, Robbins Everett 1996, and Rolls 2004. Although significant progress has been made in studying circuits involving the negative emotions, fewer brain region studies have explored neurocorrelates of positive emotions. Nietzsche et al. 2004. Investigating positive emotions is particularly challenging due to the difficulty in reliably eliciting them under experimental conditions, such as those required for PET or fMRI. Morris et al. 1996. So to address this, our study used music to evoke these particular emotions, or evoke emotion, as previous research has demonstrated that music can consistently induce strong positive and negative emotions. Comanche 1997. However, few imaging studies have examined emotion in music. So one such study conducted by Blood, as we've covered off, used the PET to investigate pleasantness, unpleasantness, dimension in response to harmonised melodies with varying degrees of dissonance, and they found that increasing unpleasantness correlated with activations in the right parahippocampal gyrus and the precuneus, whereas decreasing unpleasantness correlated with activations in the frontopolar, orbital frontal and the subcolossal cingulate cortex. So this particular study adopts a similar approach, but improves upon its melodies, improves upon it in key ways. So unlike Blood et al. 1999, who used computerized melodies, the pleasant stimuli consisted of natural, joyful instrumental dance tunes and commercially available recordings. So the unpleasant stimuli were there permanently more unpleasant than consonants, as reported by a whole magnitude of researchers that I'm not going to reel off. So the study aimed to induce both pleasant and unpleasant emotions using naturalistic stimuli. Additionally, PET studies by Brown et al. 2004 and Blood and Zatorre 2001 have explored neural activations elicited by pleasant music, activated limbic and paralimbic structures, including the subcolossal cingulate cortex, the anterior insular posterior hippocampus, the superior temporal poles, and the ventral striatum. Blood and Zatorre in 2001 examined regional cerebral blood flow, abbreviated as RCBF, changes during chills evoked by participants' favourite music. They found increased RCBF in the insular, orbital frontal cortex and the ventral striatum, while decreases in the RCBF occurred in the amygdala and the hippocampus and ventral medial prefrontal cortex. Unlike these studies, our design, or the design, should I say, it wasn't my study, allowed us to use identical stimuli across participants, controlling for individual music preferences and enabling investigations of both positive and negative emotional valence within subjects. So the hypothesis for this particular study was that, obviously, consonant music excerpts would be perceived as pleasant and permanently dissonant excerpts as unpleasant. Given the amygdala's role in processing aversive stimuli, we anticipated that unpleasant music would elicit amygdala activity changes, so specific brain regions. Additionally, based on the prior PET studies conducted by both Blood and Brown, they expected activity changes in the hippocampus, ventral striatum, frontopolar, orbital frontal and subcolossal cingulate cortex in response to pleasant music, and in the parahippocampal gyrus in response to unpleasant music. I think I said, did I say unpleasant music before? In response to pleasant music, and in the parahippocampal gyrus in response to unpleasant music. So let's be clear about which parts of the brain have which responses. So another key objective of our study was to compare brain activations during earlier and later stages of emotional music processing. The temporal dynamics of emotion have been largely overlooked in neuroimaging research, with only one physiological study addressing this in music, and this research was conducted by Cromanti, 1997. However, this is quite historic, so there has been some studies that have been done since. That was done in 1997. That study recorded physiological happiness responses, musical experts representing sadness, fear and happiness, showing that emotional intensity increased over time. We anticipated similar, I didn't, they anticipated similar temporal differences in brain activations, particularly for pleasant music, as tender positive emotions may take time to develop. So in conclusion, this study builds upon existing research by using naturalistic music stimuli to examine both positive and negative emotions processing within the same experimental design. By addressing limitations in prior studies, the findings contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of how the brain processes emotion in music. So this is the particular device that was used to conduct this particular experiment. This is like a PET scanner. And so I thought it would be interesting to show you a picture of that. You probably know what one looks like, but there you go. There's another one. And this is quite a busy slide. So I'm going to briefly just cover off the methodology. So the procedural aspects, just very briefly, not incidental, but just so that you understand how they conducted the research. And then I'm going to go into the results section here. It's quite a busy slide, and I do often get told off for putting too much on slides, but as this is a presentation that potentially can act as a education toolkit, it will be useful for you to have that information on the slide so that you can look at it later. So in terms of the procedures for this particular study, they used 10 McGill University students, and there was a 50-50 split in terms of gender. 5 females, 5 males, all between the ages of 20 and 30, and they had a minimum of 8 years of formal training. So they were selected for frequent and reproducible experiences of chills in response to music. And they provided informed consent after study procedures and potential consequences were explained. The stimuli, so in terms of how they used the stimuli, each subject was selected one piece of classical music that reliably elicited intense emotional responses, including chills. So, for example, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, Barber's Adagio for strings, and very specifically, there were no lyrics or personal associations with selected pieces. And it was done on a 90-second excerpt basis, including the chills inducing section, which were used. And you can see that 90 seconds here on the panel. So whilst I'm explaining the procedures aspect and the methodology, you can see how that is outlined on the results on the bar graph there. So each subject was selected music which was served as control. So, for example, if your piece of music was chills, a particular, so for example, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto was your chill music, that would then be assigned to another participant as part of their control. And they did. I thought, well, what if it causes chills in the other person? They did actually test for that to ensure that wasn't the case. So the emotional intensity ratings ensured neutral control of music, and the scanning procedures, we've already talked about the fact that they use PET scans performed and registered with MRI. Subjects listened to 4 conditions, which was the chill inducing, the control music, which was another person's or another subject's selection, amplitude of match noise, and silence. Okay. So each condition was repeated 3 times in a pseudo-randomized order. Physiological measures were recorded. So you can see here the heart rate, which was done in peak beats per minute. The electromyogram, which is the EMG, which was done in which you can see here. And the respiration respiration depth. They didn't die in this study, thankfully. And they also tested skin temperature too. Okay, so as you can see, it's quite obvious from these bar graphs that the chills there was more activity in heart rate, EMG, and respiration in those or from the music that was chilling for that particular participant of the study. So these were rated out of 0 to 10. Emotional intensity, again, 0 to 10, and pleasantness, -5 to +5. And in terms of assessing the data and doing the data analysis, it was conducted by a covariance, which is an ANCOVA. That's a statistical tool that's used to measure more than 3 variables, of which in this instance it was, to account for individual differences. So the significant activation defined as T 3.53 was false positive of 0.58, and the control for familiarity differences by recalculating regressions for subject selected music only. So the correlation analysis between RCBF in specific brain regions, the ventral striatum, the amygdala, the VMPF, and chills intensity. Okay, so there was a correlation between the 2 variables. That's why we've done an analysis here. And the subtraction analysis to rule out confounding factors like tempo and style to make sure that those were not having an influence on the physiological responses of the participants. So physiological regression was done to assess relationships between the physiological responses and RCBF controlling for HR, EMG, RESP, and other factors. Okay, so it's all on the slides. Feel free to pause as you need to. And so the next slide is, do you know what? I've altered this so many times, and every time I click, I have moved that top box several times up. And I don't know what it is about when I click record on this slide where it moves down. So apologies for the alignment issue there. There wasn't an issue. There currently is, but I'm going to carry on anyway. This is the results from an RCBF correlation. Okay, so this is the blood flow, and in the cerebral blood flow. And what it shows is the specific areas of the brain that are actually involved. So the increased activity. All right. So when the chills music was presented, it shows the positive correlating areas of the brain, which is done from a scanning point of view. So you can actually see it like a heat map, okay? So on the left-hand panel, A, B, and C, you've got those particular brain regions, which is, for example, the midbrain, MB here, which is where my pointer is, the thalamus, which is here, the anterior cingulate, which is the AC, which is here, the SMA, which is there, the CB, the cerebellum, which is there, and all this region here is central to reward, motor coordination, emotional responses. That's what that part of the brain is for. And then it was also seen that there was more activity, or more blood flow, shall I say, in the ventral striatum, which is there, the insula, which is here, and which are involved in pleasure emotional processing. Okay, so not just coordination, not just emotional responses, but very specifically pleasure emotional processing in those parts of the brain there. Okay, so this panel left is positive correlations, increased activity. And on the right hand side, we've got negative correlations, so decreased activity, so warmer colours. These are cooler colours, warmer colours here. And this is areas such as the VMPF, which is here, which is reduced. And that's actually responsible for visual self-preferential processing, okay? And then the amygdala, which is obviously a fear-related response to pleasure, okay? So here, okay? So these are the areas that there was less activity with the chills music, all right? So when it was chills, it was not inducing fear. When it was chills, there was less visual self-referential processing going on. There was less decision-making and reward evaluation. So less cognitive processes, less sort of critical thinking, so to speak, I would say. Okay, so people that were more interested, or what it was inducing is more emotional and pleasure responses, as opposed to thinking about a mathematical problem or I need to run away because there's a lion chasing me type of thing. All right, so that's just an interesting visual representation. Apologise for the alignment on that slide. So that covers off that particular theory. We're going to move on to, feel free to pause and get a cup of tea, because this is like 30 minutes. So it's going to be like an hour and a half in total. This is the second theory of Juslin and Sloboda, using another paper. And this is to do with neurobiological approaches. Okay, so we covered off at the start, but I'm going to go back through the summary again, because again it's helpful to repeat things. Moving on to neurobiological approaches. Research has demonstrated that music directly influences brain structures involved in emotion, stress and reward processing. So the key mechanisms of music impact on the brain: dopaminergic reward system activation. Okay, so we've already talked about blood. We've done that in quite a lot of detail on what that does and how it activates mood and motivation, in terms of also amygdala modulation, stress reduction. The amygdala, which processes emotional reactions such as fear and anxiety, shows reduced activity when listening to calm music, as reported by Kolsch 2014. And this suggests a neurobiological basis for why music can alleviate stress and promote emotional regulation. So not only from a psychological point of view, but from an autonomic nervous system regulation. So this is the study that I'm going to go into, which looks at the autonomic nervous system. So not only brain regions, but actually the endocrine system. So I'm going to go into detail about that. Music can alter autonomic responses such as heart rate and respiration. So, for example, slow tempo and low pitch music can stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, promoting relaxation and lowering stress. The application to music and emotion regulation, rhythmic high-tempo music is effective for motivation and energy, commonly used in exercise, sport and performance. And slow melodic low-frequency music has been seen to reduce cortisol levels, which is the hormone responsible for stress, facilitating stress relief. And this is the study that I'm going to go into by Akimoto. So in particular, what they found, and this is the study of the frequency of 5 to 8 hertz, music has gained attention for its reported ability to reduce anxiety and enhance relaxation through further research, though further research is ongoing. This is a 2018 study, so it's not too long ago, but it's still quite an old study. This Koch 2014 summarised the findings, stating that music can serve as non-pharmacological intervention for stress and anxiety by engaging the limbic. So I think people think, emotions, it's affecting the mind. Well, actually, it's affecting your limbic system and your autonomic nervous system. So it's affecting you on a biological level, which I think is absolutely fascinating if we can engage the physiology of it and the chemicals within our systems through music. We can look at quite fantastic treatment strategies for all sorts of things. Anyway, practical strategies to implement this for emotional regulation: select stimulating rhythmic music to boost motivation, obviously, endurance in physical activities, and use slow tempo calming music before sleep or high stress environments to reduce physiological arousal. It depends on how much stress you want in your system to keep you aroused, because a little bit of stress can be helpful, particularly if you've got to be alert, or you need energy for a long period of time through a stressful event. Sometimes it can be useful to be a little bit stressed, but if not, using frequencies such as 5 to 8 hertz for potential stress modulation and relaxation, which benefits. So in summary, music influences on a set of neurobiological processes, underscoring its potential as an accessible and effective tool for emotional regulation and stress management. So I'm going to go into the paper by Akimoto now. So this study was to do with the effect of 5 to 8 hertz music on endocrine system and autonomic nervous system and its emotional processing mechanism. So we can look here, sorry, my face is over part of it, but this is the central nervous system, which is a little map of the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system, and how it operates in a sort of wheel, and how the internal environment works through the entire central nervous system. So not only the brain, but also the endocrine system, okay, which I'm going to show you a picture of in a second. So music and its effects. As we can see, research has shown that music can have powerful influences on our autonomic nervous system, which is abbreviated as ANS, and endocrine responses, so ultimately affecting our emotional states. One interesting study by Akimoto et al. In 2018 explored the impact of music tuned to 5 to 8 hertz, a frequency commonly linked to stress reduction. So these participants experienced noticeable reduction in cortisol, which is one of the primary hormones. Alongside this, they were observed improvement in heart rate also. Variability, a key indicator of parasympathetic relaxation activity. These physiological changes were accompanied by self-reported reductions in anxiety and overall mood disturbances. This suggests that music can indeed help us relax and reduce stress, utilising both autonomic and endocrine pathways to create a sense of calm. So the study reinforces the potential of music to not only improve our mood, but also influence our biological systems that regulate stress and relaxation. So it's very simplistically put, but I thought the statistics are actually really quite complicated. So I'm going to go through the endocrine system and chromogranin A, and also the statistics for this particular study. So chromogranin A is a very under-talked about, or not very much talked about, key biomarker for stress, and it plays an important role in our physiological responses. We talk a lot about cortisol, but we don't talk a huge amount about chromogranin. It's found in the submaxillary duct, and it is released into the saliva when the autonomic nervous system is activated, as highlighted by Saruta et al. In 2005 and Akimoto et al. In 2018. Okay, so this is the endocrine system, by the way. So you can see that it runs through the entire system: the pineal gland, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, which are all centred in the brain. Then we go into the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, the adrenal glands, and then the pancreas and the testes. So interestingly, chromogranin rises before cortisol during periods of stress, and they tend to decrease relatively early on once the stress is alleviated, as shown by Kane in 2008. So this makes chromogranin a valuable early indicator of stress response and recovery, providing us with more immediate understanding of how the body reacts to stresses. So if we can identify that and its signalling, so to speak, then we can strategize for it. And it's useful to test the biomarkers on a physiological level in order to see what's going on effectively, as one aspect. Here I've showing you a pretty slide of 5 to 8 hertz. So what I suggest you do is have a go when you're feeling potentially or particularly stressed, is that you YouTube this particular hertz, lie down flat, close your eyes, and listen to this particular frequency, and you will find a noticeable difference in your disposition, so how you feel and how you react to things afterwards, as a particular mechanism, combined with other things like exercise and diet and mindfulness and so on and so forth. It is a useful armoury to put in your combating stress toolkit. So yeah, just YouTube 5 to 8 hertz healing frequency and see how you get on. The two key biomarkers for stress, as we've already covered, so I'm just going to reiterate because repetition is useful. Cortisol and chromogranin A, in recent studies, 5 to 8 hertz has gained attention as a healing frequency, which I just showed you in the previous slide. Okay, so it is categorized as the healing frequency. In an experiment comparing two conditions, the 5 to 8 hertz and the 440 hertz. So what they did is they looked at 440 comparative to the 5 to 8 hertz to see if there was a notable difference in terms of the hormone, so in terms of cortisol. So a tendency for chromogranin A to decline and a significant increase in oxytocin, which is often associated with feelings of bonding and relaxation. So you've got these two or three hormones, cortisol and chromogranin, which are linked to stress, and then oxytocin, which is linked to relaxation or feelings of love, often. There was a significant notice, of difference in these particular hormones. In contrast, the 440 hertz condition showed no significant changes in any of the salivary biomarkers. These biomarkers included the three that I've already just mentioned, and they were measured before and after music exposure, providing valuable insights into how music interacts with our stress responses. So as we move into the autonomic nervous system, the experiment also recorded activity throughout the process. Exposure to 5 to 8 hertz music led to decrease in autonomic nervous system activity, reflected in significant reduction in the coefficient variation of RR intervals. This is a marker of heart rate variability. Okay, so the music at 5 to 8 also reduced tension anxiety and the overall mood disturbance scores significantly, with no such effects seen with the 440 hertz music. These results suggest that music influences on both the autonomic nervous and endocrine influences on both the autonomic nervous system, endocrine system, can be can also vary depending on the frequency. So 5 to 8 having a particularly strong stress reducing effect after 5 minutes of exposure. It's quite an information packed slide, but hopefully it gives you the key points of what I've just mentioned for your takeaway. Here is the process outlined in a schematic way, and also some images of some of the devices that were used in terms of recording. So you've got the M-bit device, or it might not have been that, but that's what, an example of an M-bit device or a tracer. Electrocardiogram, which was recorded continuously from acclimation to 45 minutes post music exposure, and music exposure duration of 5 minutes. So what they did was saliva samples were collected at 5 time points immediately before and after the exposure to see the effects, and immediately after exposure 50 minutes later, 30 minutes later and 45 minutes later, and a profile of mood states second edition questionnaire. So they did it on a qualitative as well as a physiological, so psychological basis, where they asked questions about how they felt before and after exposure. So two-pronged approach, experimental procedure of both qualitative and quantitative over specific durations, and it just shows you the time points across the line. Here you can see 0 minutes, 15, 30, 45, where the POMS, which is the questionnaire, was administered, where the saliva collection was done, and they were wearing the M-bit continuously throughout the entire process. So this is a schematic of the procedure, and these are the devices. So this is if you can screenshot it and then expand, you can see the saliva collections there. Okay, so that's what happened there. And this is another results slide, which just shows you from a statistical point of view in a bar graph the effects comparative. So 528 Hz in comparison to 440, you can see there's a notable difference in the 528 Hz in comparison to 440. You can see that the cortisol, which is being measured there, I think milliliters, UG, just trying to think what UG is, come to me shortly. So because of the consideration of the time lag, saliva was collected and measured straight after exposure to music because of the time lagging situation. So they weren't actually testing for chromogranin by the looks of things. So because of that time lag, they were very cute, is the word, in terms of their time points when recording. Okay, and the data only available 30 minutes after music exposure meant that the mean levels of salivary cortisol decreased significantly, reduced 30 minutes later. Okay, so after the exposure, we saw a decrease in cortisol. And I think that's summarising it from a visual perspective quite clearly. If we move on to the third theory by Juslin and Sloboda, and I've used Hagen and Bryant in this particular slide to demonstrate that from a paper in 2003. So the evolutionary perspectives, okay, as we discussed previously, that were established originally by Darwin in 1871, then Miller. We've got another issue in terms of the slide alignment. I did fix all of this. I don't know what it is about the recording, but never mind. So I think we covered off briefly the application to emotion regulation, which is that social music making, such as singing and drumming, enhances social connection and reduces loneliness, which was developed by Cross, or should I say reported by Cross in 2001. And as we all know, lullabies and calming music have evolutionarily used to regulate infants' emotions, reported by Treehub in 2003, but obviously by All Mothers up into the most recent time of 2025. So music can synchronise emotions in groups, strengthening collective emotional resilience, as reported by Savage et al. 2021. And in terms of practical strategies, quite simply, engage in group singing. That's why people like to be part of choirs or go to church even, if not for the pastor preaching, for the very act of singing. Not only is the act of singing a dopaminergic and endorphin releasing exercise, it's also the communal music making that strengthens emotional well-being. So again, why they use music in therapy collectively to regulate interpersonal emotional states. For example, in PTSD patients, as well as exercise, music can align the emotional states, as reported by Kolch 2014. So music can facilitate social bonding and emotional alignment, which may have its universal role in human cultures. And I've missed off a bracket there. So there's a couple of blips on this slide that need fixing next time. But I'm not going to record it again because this is the third time. So apologies for the picture just going over a date there, and I'm missing a bracket. So if you are a psychology student, then make sure that you do that, because you will get marked down if you don't. But this isn't a assignment, so I might get away with it. Okay, so in terms of the background of this particular study, we have got a big lion on the screen. Why have we got a lion? Well, the reason why we've got a lion is that in terms of territorial defence, let me just start by saying that research suggests that music and dance evolved as coalition, because that's really important, because coalition is the big part of this particular study. Coalition signalling systems which allow groups to demonstrate unity, stability and coordination in both allies and in rivals, interestingly. So music's also been used as war dances, for example. So territorial defence, which is why I've got a picture of an animal, in particular a lion, species, co-coordinated vocalization, so coyotes, lions, gibbons, chimpanzees, and they serve to deter intruders and signal group strength. So similarly, human musical displays may have historically functioned to signal group identity to deter threats, so to alert a member of your species to say, okay, there's a threat happening here, you need to do something, run away or go somewhere else. Though unlike animals, human music also attracts outside potential allies. Okay, so coalition signalling hypothesis and alliance formation. Strong coalitions require long-term stability and the ability to act collectively. Okay. Music and dance serve as credible signals of coalition strength. Groups that invest time in synchronized, complex performances demonstrate internal stability and coordination. And I've already mentioned about war. People don't really think about music in terms of war, but it has been used, and it's used a lot in politics as well. And also done quite surreptitiously, should I say. The word surreptitiously can be done surreptitiously, particularly for politics. Alliances depend on assessing coalition quality, often through elaborate performances at feasts and gatherings. So combat and strategic signalling historically has been showing that warriors would engage in pre-battle musical displays to intimidate enemies. If you've ever seen Braveheart, you'll know what I'm talking about, and assess coalition strength. Music not only signals coordination and cohesion, but also conveys collective emotional states, influencing strategic interactions. Okay, so the coalition signalling hypothesis. Music and dance are not just entertainment, but evolved tools for displaying group strength. Okay, so it's used as a form of, it's a little bit like gaining muscle, which I'm currently in the process of doing, gaining muscle through exercise. Okay, so that's a visual representation of me. I'm gaining strength. I'm building muscle physically. Doing that from a group perspective, you're fostering alliances and managing intergroup relationships, which can be both positive and negative, okay, depending on the circumstances, particularly if it's been used from a political point of view. And obviously there's certain genres from a racial point of view that have powerfully used music. Motown, jazz as prime examples where the music is derived from, but we won't digress into that today. An experiment tested whether this particular experiment tested whether people infer coalition quality from music quality, particularly through synchronization. Results suggest that tighter synchrony enhances perceived quality. So music and dance, deeply embedded in human culture, serve as social glue. Okay. We know this. We know that what do you do when you go to a party? You dance to music, mostly. Weddings, as an example, it's a social gluing mechanism, whether you do that to a DJ or band. That is what happens mostly, unless you've got, obviously, elderly family. They tend to sit around the edges watching everybody else dance. So this strengthens group identity, cooperation and emotional expression at both individual and collective levels. So in terms of the method, there's another schematic of how you often find schematics in papers to look at from a procedural point of view, what they did. So to test for the coalition signalling hypothesis, which was an experiment conducted at the University of Carolina, Santa Barbara, the study actually aimed to determine whether people infer coalition quality from music quality. Okay, so is there coalition quality if there's musical quality that's evident, right? So you've got, if we look at figure 1 over here, we've got drums, we've got acoustic guitar, we've got electric guitar and bass guitar, okay? And these instruments were offset. So they were synchronized for one play, or however many plays it was, and then they were offset, so they were unsynchronized, and they were done so, it was done very specifically through using the 300 ms tone as a cross-track marker, which is quite, well, it's not really complicated, but you have tracking tone markers, particularly in recordings, when you do a recording, and you can set that at certain times. So for example, if I'm doing backing vocals on a track and I don't want the harmonies to come in until 1 minute 32, or however you want to track it, in this instance it's 3 ms, the 300 ms, then that's what you can do. You can offset, which can either be a positive or it can be cataclysmic if it's not aligned correctly, which is the purpose of this particular experiment. And it was also offset at 120 ms and 180 respectively for the out of sync version, okay? And this image is copied from Hagen and Bryant, as are all the other images copied from the papers, okay? So these are not my images. None of these are my images. They're all copied from the papers and referenced accordingly. And so what happened in terms of the participants? They were randomly assigned to one version of the song. And after listening, they completed a questionnaire. Okay, so this is a questionnaire type of experiment, so qualitative. And they assessed perceived music quality and coalition quality. So the key measures for this, and that's why I'm going into the stats in detail for this particular study, the key measures are music quality score, and it was assessed on how good the music sounded. Okay, so that's one key measure. Key measure 2, coalition quality score, which measured how well the musicians seemed to work together. And the findings from this study helped the participants understand, or the researchers and the participants, how musical coordination impacts perception of music cohesion, supporting the idea that synchronized music serves as a signal of coalition and strength, which is interesting because actually a lot of jazz music is not synchronized music at all. So that's a potential hole in this particular study. But for the purpose of this, you can see that, you know, that's why a lot of people like, particularly at events, pop music as an example, as opposed to a lot of, depending on the jazz, of course. If it's jazz standard, it's slightly different. But anyway, results index. So I've indexed all of this because it's quite complicated and there's a lot of it, but this is the particular aspect of this presentation that I am going to go into the results in a lot of detail because it is interesting and there's a lot of statistics. So the composite score, which is shown, combines the overall rating of the quality of the music into integrating things like liking, skill and practice. Okay, so it reflects an aggregate, just to put it in a different way, judgment that blends both the emotional, liking, and technical skill practice components, giving a more holistic evaluation of the music score. So the same thing twice in two different ways, but saying the same thing effectively. Okay. The correlation of this composite score with coalition quality further suggests that participants perceive a strong connection between the quality of music and the social cohesion of the musicians. All right, so you've got the two variables one versus the other: coalition quality versus music quality, coalition quality versus musician skills, coalition quality versus practice perception. Okay, coalition versus composite music quality. So coalition score, the coalition quality score in this music refers to how well participants perceived the musicians' ability to work together as a group. It reflects social perceptions of teamwork or cohesion, and this is distinct from technical music quality. It's a judgment about the musicians' social dynamics, such as how in sync they appear with one another or how they seem to gel as a group. So correlations. The correlation coefficient denoted as RS, so this is the coefficient here, RS, measures the strength and the direction of relationship between the two variables. So the dog's decided to start sniffing. The study presents several correlations between coalition quality in different aspects of music, as well as the role of controlling for perceived niceness of the musicians. So, for example, RS equals 0.44. So let's just look at that. Coalition quality versus musician skills there, right? Means a moderate positive correlation exists between these two variables being measured. So in practical terms, a correlation of 0.44 suggests moderate association between these two variables, meaning they are related. Okay, so there is something going on there, but not perfectly so. The higher the RS value toward P+1, the stronger the relationship between the variables. Okay, so the closer to 0.1, which is, for example, in these 4.53, is the closest to 1, which is the coalition quality versus composite music quality. All right. So that is the highest, but none of them are above 60. Okay. So they are correlated, but not perfectly so. And it might be for one of the reasons that I suggested, which is that actually you can have coalition in completely randomized dissonant music that doesn't, like they're all playing and enjoying themselves, having a really good time, but it is not synchronized whatsoever. Yeah. Happens a lot. Anyway, furthermore, on the results index, the controlling for niceness, let's just explain that a little bit. The control for a variable, they account for its influence to isolate the relationship between two other variables. So let me just repeat that so that you understand. When researchers control for a variable, so you have to control for a variable to make sure there's no outlanders or outliers or things that are could have other things that could impact it, like, you know, like in the previous study, like tempo and genre affecting chills. Well, you know, is it that as an example? Whether that was covered off effectively is questionable. It could be a potential limitation of that study, but in this particular example, they account its influence to isolate the relationship between two variables. In this case, niceness refers to participants' general perceptions of the musicians' personalities or likability. So before controlling for the niceness, the correlation between the music quality and coalition quality could be influenced by the assumption that nice people make better music. Is that the case? Miles Davis apparently wasn't a very nice musician, but he made nice music. But in terms of his character, one could question his niceness. That's the cat. Wasn't expecting whatever just to fall off there, but never mind. So allowing researchers to see if music quality is still linked to coalition quality, independent of how nice the musicians seem. So if it suggests that music quality is directly associated with coalition quality rather than being an indirect effect of perceived likability. The figure RS equals 0.15, which is the case in this particular control. The 0.64 represents a correlation analysis between the niceness and the perceived music quality. And actually it's higher, isn't it, than the others? So it's closer to 1. But because there were a weakness in the statistics in the parametric tests, they had to conduct a non-parametric test. When there's an issue with statistics, you then go into non-parametric tests to see if you can do something about it. And they used a Spearman's rank correlation coefficient, which equals 0.15. So all of this, there are indications of weak positive correlations between particularly how nice participants perceive the musicians to be and how they liked the music. So the niceness of the musician didn't match or have it much in terms of a correlation with how much or how the music was liked. Okay, which I think is interesting. A higher niceness rating is slightly associated with the higher quality music rating, but the effect is not as strong. So read that as you will. The p-value tells us whether the correlation is statistically significant. The conventional significance threshold is p greater than 0.5. Since 0.64 the results is not statistically significant, meaning we can't be confident that the relationship between niceness and music quality isn't due to chance. So there's a possibility that actually all of this reporting is just pure chance. All right. So what this means in context, the weak and the non-significant correlation suggests that perceiving the musicians as nice doesn't strongly impact judgment of music quality. This supports the idea that other factors like synchrony play a more important role in music quality perception rather than just how nice the musicians seem. So it's useful to look at it collectively across different variables and then accounting for that. So that's the index, but I've actually gone into quite a lot of detail. So correlation coefficients, which is comparing, we've just talked about that. And this is the table. So this is quite a busy table, lots of data, lots of information. And I've kind of explained some of it in terms of how it works. There's your 4 variables and your 3 markers there. Okay, so I'm going to go into detail with what that actually means. Again, a very busy slide. If it was one of my supervisors or lecturers, they'd be telling me off right now for having too much information on my slides, but you can download this if you wish. So the data presented here supports the idea that music and dance function as coalition signalling systems as proposed by Hagen and Bryant 2003. The study examines the relationship between coalition quality and various perceptions of musicians, providing insights into how coordinated musicians influence social evaluations. So perceptions of niceness. The correlation between coalition quality and how nice the musicians appear is moderate and statistically significant. So the test is it's statistically significant, but it's moderate. Okay, so what that means is not that the results are significant, that actually we can say, okay, we can use this data. It's significant and it's moderately significant. This suggests that the musicians who perform well are perceived as more sociably likeable, reinforcing the idea that synchronized musical behavior signals group cohesion and trustworthiness. Liking the music, the relationship between coalition quality and how much participants like the music is weak and not statistically significant. RS equals 0.15 and 0.64. This indicates that the perception of coalition quality does not strongly influence how the music is enjoyed. Instead, coalition quality seems to be shape social evaluations rather than musical preferences. Okay, so I've kind of covered it off in the index as an overview, but this is a little bit deeper dive into what these coalition qualities seem to mean. A stronger correlation emerges between coalition quality and the perceived skills of the musicians. This suggests that people judge well-coordinated performances as being more skilled, which aligns with the idea that musical coordination serves as an honest signal of group competence. And we haven't really talked much about practice effort. but that was also included. The strongest correlation is between coalition quality and how much participants believed the musicians practiced, RS equals 0.46. Okay, so this supports the notion that tight musical synchronization is interpreted as signs of dedication and effort, reinforcing the idea that musical collaboration is evolved social signal. Okay. So overall, the findings provide empirical support for the coalition signalling hypothesis, which could be questioned because they're not particularly strong pieces of data. But there you go. Demonstrating that musical coordination influences social perceptions of group cohesion, competence and effort rather than simply affecting musical enjoyment. And finally, role of musical experience. Okay, the study found that self-reported musical experience did not significantly correlate with perceptions of either music quality or coalition. This suggests that both musically trained and non-trained individuals rated the music and the musician's social bond similarly, indicating that musical experiences was not a key factor in these perceptions. Okay. Influence of age and gender. So these are a couple of demographics that had an impact. Older participants rated both music quality and coalition quality lower than younger participants. However, when controlling for age, the main findings, the strong correlation between music and coalition quality, did not change significantly. And interestingly, women rated music quality higher. I thought women were more critical than men, but there you go. In this study, they weren't critical. They rated the music quality as higher than men. However, there were no gender differences found in perceptions of coalition quality. All right, indicating that gender can influence music quality perceptions, not social cohesion judgments. Effect of synchrony or on perceived music quality. So synchrony refers to the timing of the music in this study. Different versions of music were presented. In sync versions, no delay, rated as higher quality. Out of sync versions, 60 ms delay, rated as significantly lower quality. And then the scramble version did not significantly differ from the in sync version, possibly due to small sample size. So this suggests that time and consistency in the music plays a crucial role in how music is judged, and more synchronized performances are perceived as better. So synchrony, music quality and coalition quality. Music synchrony affected both music quality and coalition quality perceptions. More synchronized music was rated as higher quality and reflecting a stronger social bond between musicians. Out of sync music was perceived as lower music, both music quality and social cohesion. So in terms of the path analysis showed that synchrony directly influenced music quality, which in turn induced coalition quality. Once music quality was associated for synchrony, no longer directly influenced coalition quality, indicating that music quality was the primary driver of social bond perceptions. Okay, final statement there. So obviously, and I haven't talked about this in the other studies because there's so much to talk to you about, but there's an obvious, all the studies have limitations and takeaways, okay, but I haven't done this for all of the studies, just for this one, just because I thought it was more limited than some of the others. The acoustic variation due to different listening environments might have influenced participants' perception of volume and clarity. Demand characteristics. So participants might have suspected the study's purpose. For example, better music, better people. So they might have guessed what it was all about. But the inclusion of nisus control helped address this potential bias. So because they had other indicators that they tested for, that did address some of the issues there. So the key takeaways from this particular study are that there are stronger perceived social bonds between musicians, And the relationship between music quality and coalition quality was not simply due to assumptions about niceness. So just because you're nice doesn't make you a better, or the music better. And also it doesn't mean that there's a better quality, coalition quality if you're nice, which suggests that you could be not nice, which is interesting because like in Motown or when I've done Postmodern Jukebox, sometimes the vibe is supposed to be, it's a bit kind of not conflicting, but obviously Aretha Franklin singing about oppression and so on and so forth. Synchrony in music timing. So just moving on to synchrony in music, timing played a critical role in how music and social cohesion were judged, and older participants rated music, both music and coalition quality, lower than younger participants. So women rated music quality higher than men, but this did not affect perceptions of quality, coalition quality. And the study provides insights into how the music quality and social cohesion, and sorry, my face is in front of that, social and psychological processes shaping how musicians and their group dynamics are perceived or are entwined, and how timing and synchrony influence both. Okay, but my face is in front of some of the words, but you will be able to have the slides if you want them. Okay, so finally, I'm not going to show you the reference slide because I've done lots of citations and they're not all on the reference slide. So if you do want the reference slide, you'll have to contact me. Feel free to do so. In summary, just to look at the overall findings from the entire presentation and how to tie that together. Throughout this presentation, we've explored how music influences emotion through multiple perspectives: cognitive appraisal, neurobiology, and evolution. Cognitive appraisal theory suggests that emotional responses to music depend on individual interpretation. Blood and Zatorre in 2001 showed that music-induced chills activate reward-related brain areas, reinforcing that personal meaning shapes our emotional experiences. Neurobiological approaches highlight how music directly affects the brain and body. So Blood and Zatorre in 2001 identified key brain regions involved in musical pleasure, while Akimoto et al. In 2018 demonstrated that listening to 528 Hz music reduces stress by lowering cortisol and enhancing relaxation. And from an evolutionary perspective, this proposes that music evolved as a tool for social bonding, as reported by Hagen and Bryant, who argued that music signals coalition strength, fostering group cohesion. Akimoto et al. In 2018 further supported this by showing music's role in stress regulation and well-being. And applying these ideas to emotional management, by understanding how music interacts with our emotions, we can use it as a tool for regulation. So enhanced mood and motivation. Listening to personally meaningful music can activate reward pathways, boosting motivation and resilience. In particular, if you think about the 528, although that's not necessarily motivating, that's more relaxing, but it can build resilience. Reducing stress. Slow tempo music, especially in lower frequencies, can engage the parasympathetic nervous system, helping to lower cortisol and promote relaxation. And strengthening social bonds. Group music making, whether singing in or playing instruments, reinforces social connection, reducing feelings of isolation. Music is more than entertainment, is a powerful emotional tool shaped by cognitive, biological, and evolutionary mechanisms. By harnessing its effects, we can actively shape our emotional experiences and well-being. I hope you've enjoyed that. Please feel free to get in contact if you want to have a session with me about anything musically orientated or otherwise, psychology, molecular neuroscience. I'm not necessarily a subject expert, but I think I can help with a master's, hopefully, in particular if it's relating to music. Or other subjects. I've done lots of subjects. I don't want to be pigeonholed. Anyway, hopefully that was interesting. Take care.